We begin this morning with the race for the White House as voters in Michigan head to the polls today to take part in the presidential primaries.
On the Republican side, former President Donald Trump is looking to defeat his rival, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, for a fifth straight time. Haley has spent the last few days meeting with voters across Michigan. Polls show the former president does have an advantage in the state.
In the Democratic primary, President Biden is expected to come out on top today, but there has been a push by some Michigan Democrats to vote against the president, instead voting uncommitted on the ballot. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer says she is confident in the Biden administration.
I think in Michigan, you can always count on close elections. That's true no matter who's on the ballot. And that's why I think it's important that they are focused on Michigan. And I'm grateful that their agenda has shown problem solving and the values that we care about.
So what can we expect today? Let's bring in NBC News senior national politics reporter Jonathan Allen. John, good to have you with us. So let's start on the GOP side. Former President Trump is the favorite to win Michigan. That would put him one step closer to winning the Republican nomination for a third straight time. So just explain to us what's at stake for both the Trump and Haley campaigns here. If Haley loses, realistically, how long can she stay in this? Till Super Tuesday?
She seems to be committed to at least getting through Super Tuesday and perhaps even beyond that. It would be a shock if she won Michigan at this point. There is not a path for her to win the nomination that doesn't involve Donald Trump no longer being on the ballot, and yet Nikki Haley continues to go forward. So again, huge upset if she were to win Michigan. She's so far been unable to identify a state where she thinks she can actually win. It looks like Donald Trump is likely to wrap up the nomination in terms of delegates by Super Tuesday, or if not, by what's called mini Super Tuesday following that.
John, on the Democratic side, I mentioned this push by some in the party to not vote for President Biden. This is really over his handling of the Israel-Hamas war. In an interview yesterday with our Gabe Gutierrez, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer says she expects that some voters will vote against the president. Let's listen to a little bit of that.
I think there will be a sizable number of votes for uncommitted. I think that it is every person's right to make their statement about what's important to them. At the end of the day, I am advocating that people cast an affirmative vote for Joe Biden, because anything other than that makes it more likely we see a second Trump term, and that's bad for all the communities.
So, John, Michigan played a pivotal role in determining the winner of the 2020 election. What are you watching out for today as voters cast their ballots?
I think the raw number of that uncommitted vote against Biden is going to be something to watch, because it basically will give us at least some idea of what he's at stake, what he has at stake in terms of losing in the general election. We've seen Michigan, certainly in the last two elections in 2016 and 2020, coming very closely. So, a difference of tens of thousands of votes could make the difference in Michigan, and Michigan could end up making the difference across the country. This is not something that Joe Biden is ignoring, nor is it something he can afford to ignore, nor is it something that is small potatoes. I really do think that watching that uncommitted number will be important for certainly the White House, for those of us in the media trying to get a sense of what will happen later this year, and I'm sure folks in the Trump camp will be watching it as well.
John, a reminder that primary season is a little confusing sometimes. Not all the delegates are going to be awarded today in the Republican race. A majority will actually be awarded this weekend at a state party convention. Real quick, what more should we know about that?
It's a circus in Michigan. First of all, they've got this hybrid primary, as you point to, where part of it's awarded based on the primary result, part of it's a lot of it's done based on a convention. Here's the problem in Michigan. They have two different people claiming to be the rightful chairman of the Republican Party of Michigan, and they look like they're going to have two separate conventions to try to determine who these delegates are. Basically, there was one person who was in that role. She was replaced by Pete Hoekstra, former congressman, but will not give up all of the sort of state party materials. There's going to be lawsuits over this. I'm trying to think of a term that's appropriate for morning television. and I'll just leave it at that.
You painted a good picture here. It sounds like it's like a choose-your-own convention sort of weekend.
Yeah.
So there we go. All right, John, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, well, as Trump continues to hit the campaign trail, his legal team has officially filed paperwork to begin appealing that $464 million judgment handed to him earlier this month here in New York.
That penalty was the culmination of a months-long trial led by New York Attorney General Letitia James. She accused the former president of overstating his company's assets in order to secure favorable loans and insurance policies. The $464 million penalty figure includes the prejudgment interest that has accrued since the ruling was entered on Friday. Mr. Trump is also barred from running any business from New York for 3 years.
NBC News legal analyst Angela Sanadella joins us on set to break this down. Angela, good morning. Thanks for being here. So the Trump team wants an appeals court to determine if, among other things, Judge Engoron committed errors of law. Walk us through what that means, what else was in this filing, and really kind of what you make of the legal case the Trump team has here.
Yes, good morning. Well, first of all, let's be clear that this appeal is very unlikely to be successful. All appeals generally have a very small shot, and in this case, the judge was so thorough in his written opinion to make sure that none of his legal rulings will be appealed or will be reversed. Now, that said, I see two main areas. First, the idea that this law is primarily a consumer protection statute, meaning in the past, it's only been used against businesses, never applied to an individual. In this case, given the size of the judgment, also that it was against an individual for the first time ever in the history of the statute, could be a basis for appeal. The second regards statute of limitations. We've heard his team talk about this extensively, but in the same way that Ivanka Trump was dismissed from the case due to statute of limitations, his team is going to keep on saying that he also should be barred for that same reason.
Let's talk about the money. Does he have to pay any of it or some of it while he's appealing?
Yeah, so he has to put that money up within a 30-day period after that judgment was entered on Friday. Now, look, what he can do is get a bond company to put that money up. But that said, there aren't a lot of bond companies, especially in New York, that can put up a judgment of that side. So there remains large questions as to how this money can be put up. We've heard Letitia James say that if this money is not put up, that she will start seizing properties. It is very possible at this point he might have to start selling. I mean, we've seen here defendants like Alex Jones and also Rudy Giuliani have to be forced into bankruptcy to pay these huge settlements.
And while we have you, before we let you go, I do want to switch gears here. The Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. This now we are talking about the New York falsified business records case. He wants to issue this gag order on the former president. What do you make of that? Is this to protect somebody in particular, especially based on what we've seen in the past with gag orders?
Yes, so it's been a pretty narrow gag order that he has requested for the jurors, for the witnesses, and also for the other prosecutors that are not himself. But the problem here is that you have to weigh this against the First Amendment, and that is massive. We always say unprecedented, but literally there's never been an active presidential candidate who could possibly be gagged from speaking in this way. Also, these are not anonymous witnesses. This is Michael Cohen as the star witness, who has talked extensively, who has made excoriating remarks against Trump himself. So it is unclear at what level this judge will decide to institute this gag order. He has to weigh the Constitution and also the safety.
All right, Angela Sanadella, thank you so much. Now let's get to the Israel-Hamas war, where this morning there is new hope for a ceasefire in Gaza.
President Biden was asked about the likelihood of a pause during a stop to get ice cream in New York while appearing on NBC's Late Night with Seth Meyers. He said he hopes to have a deal for a ceasefire by next week.
Well, I hope by the beginning of the weekend. I mean, the end of the weekend. At least my national security advisor tells me that we're close. We're close. It's not done yet. And my hope is by next Monday, we'll have a ceasefire.
For more, we're joined by NBC News international correspondent Josh Letterman in London. So, Josh, these new comments from the president come as Qatar is mediating talks between Israel and Hamas this week. Where do things stand with the negotiations?
Well, there is a delegation involving Israeli officials, Egyptian officials, and as you mentioned, Qatari officials who are in Doha right now trying to hammer this out. But as far as the specifics of the deal, Joe, there are frankly quite a bit of different scenarios that are floating around out there. And so Al Jazeera is reporting, citing multiple sources, a deal in which some 400 Palestinians would be exchanged for some 40 Israelis. So roughly 10-to-1 ratio. Our own Andrea Mitchell spoke to a person familiar with the talks who said they're more discussing a 3-to-1 ratio, which would be in line with the previous hostage deal. And there's also New York Times reporting suggesting a smaller deal in which 5 Israeli female troops being held by Hamas would be traded for some 15 Palestinians who are convicted of serious terrorism offenses. So the details a little bit difficult to pin down right now, but one common element here, pretty much all of these deals involve some cessation of hostilities for the month of Ramadan, which begins on March 10th.
Josh, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that deal or no deal, no matter what happens here with what we're talking about, his forces are going to go into the southern Gazan city of Rafah. Now, that is where nearly 1.5 million Palestinians have sought safety since the war began. Does Israel have any type of evacuation plan to get those refugees to safety before a planned assault on the city?
Yeah, well, this has been a controversy for weeks now, with the U.S. demanding a concrete plan. Now Israel says that it does have a plan that was submitted by its military yesterday to the War Cabinet. According to 2 Israeli officials who spoke to our Raf Sanchez, they envision many of these Palestinians moving into Khan Yunis, which is the largest city in southern Gaza, has been the focus of intense Israeli bombardment. And so once that's cleared out, the idea is many of those people in Rafah could go to recently reopened Khan Yunis, but all of those people in Rafah are expected to stay in the southern portion of the Gaza Strip. Israel not expected to let them go back to their homes in the north. And in the meantime, the U.S. says it still has not seen any kind of a concrete plan from the Israelis.
And Josh, I mean, the situation on the ground just keeps getting worse. In northern Gaza, there's growing concern about famine. What's the latest there?
Yeah, well, the UN now says that humanitarian aid deliveries to the Gaza Strip actually dropped by 50% this month compared to last month. So you're absolutely right. The humanitarian crisis is growing very fast, but countries are trying to step up in creative ways, including Jordan, which has started airdropping humanitarian aid shipments into the Gaza Strip from aircraft, including 40 tons of supplies for women in the Gaza Strip that they dropped in the last few days, Joe.
The U.S. airman who set himself on fire in an apparent protest against the Israel-Hamas war has died. The airman, who was identified by police as 25-year-old Aaron Bushnell, called Israel's war in Gaza genocide and filmed himself yelling "Free Palestine" before collapsing to the ground outside the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. In a statement overnight, the Air Force confirmed Bushnell was a cyber defense operations specialist and was serving as a senior airman as part of an intelligence unit based out of Texas. The Air Force says the exact details of his death are still under investigation.
Well, lawmakers are racing to avoid a partial government shutdown by the end of the week.
It's a headline we have uttered many times. So what's going to happen this time? Well, this morning, President Biden is meeting with the top 4 congressional leaders at the White House to push for a deal aimed at averting the shutdown. The president is also expected to press lawmakers on passing the stalled $95 billion national security bill, which includes aid for Israel and Ukraine.
Joining us now, and this is NBC News congressional correspondent Julie Sirkin and our White House correspondent Aaron Gilchrist. Good morning to both of you. Julie, I'll begin with you. Walk us through the upcoming shutdown deadlines and what's at stake here.
Yeah, guys, just a couple of days away on Friday, you got that first tranche of deadlines. Remember, this is because Speaker Johnson put in that laddered 2-step shutdown funding deadlines, which makes this so much more complicated. So coming up this Friday, you see it on your screen, you've got a shutdown of the Agriculture Department, Energy, Housing and Urban Development, Veteran Affairs, and Transportation. That's about 1/4 of the government. So the shutdown would affect all of those agencies. Then fast forward to next Friday, March 8th. If they don't meet that deadline, then you got the shutdown of the Department of Defense, state, and other matters there too, like judiciary and other federal agencies. So certainly this is a big deal, and a partial government shutdown would affect millions of people, millions of workers, and all of these agencies, I should add, already began putting out their plans in case of a shutdown, in case lawmakers can't get to an agreement, which the clock is ticking.
Julie, what are we hearing from lawmakers about this? I mean, are we likely to get a deal by March 1st? We've been in this situation a lot of times.
We sure have. Our viewers know that countdown shutdown clock they've been seeing all year long because of policy differences. But in this case, it really seems like this is more political. There aren't a lot of policy disagreements between Senate and House appropriators who've been working on these year-long bills for the last couple of months. But the thing is, Speaker Johnson certainly has a lot of pressure from hardliners. Yesterday, we heard from Leader Schumer on the Senate floor. Reminder, the House isn't even back until tomorrow, even though Speaker Johnson is going to the White House today. I want you to listen to what Schumer said and Johnson on the flip side.
I hope the House continues to work with us in good faith to make that happen. But time is short. Time is short.
We have the means and just enough time this week to avoid a shutdown and to make serious headway on annual appropriations. But as always, the task at hand will require that everyone rows in the same direction.
Of course, that was Republican leader McConnell there on the backside. Schumer and McConnell here, though different parties, clearly on the same page. They don't want to shut down, but sources tell me that Speaker Johnson doesn't want one either. The problem is hardliners in his conference do want that year-long stopgap measure to kick in April. That means 1% cuts all across the agencies. That's something that former Speaker McCarthy negotiated with President Biden last spring to raise the debt ceiling. So a lot going on here. We'll see if they can get there by Friday's deadline, but certainly a shutdown will not be good for anybody.
Aaron, let's bring you in here from the president's perspective. What will his message be to the congressional leaders on this looming shutdown?
Well, the White House has suggested that former President Donald Trump is really the hardliner in chief here, putting his thumb on the scale as efforts to get these measures passed through Congress have been slowed. And so today, I think what we'll see is President Biden and Vice President Harris joining together with the 4 top congressional leaders at the White House to have a conversation. The White House says the president intends to push Congress to try to get something done, to move these bills that would fund the government beyond the first deadline on Friday. And also the president wants to talk about national security. We know that there's been a measure passed in the Senate that would provide funding for Ukraine, for Israel, for originally for the border, and now there's a separate border effort. But it seems as though the White House feels like these are things that Congress needs to get done. It's on Congress to do the work to get these bills passed, to get these measures passed, and to keep working. But the White House knows that the president is one who feels as though he can bring people around a table and sort of talk through some of the hard points and create some reconciliation to try to get the ball moving. We don't know that that's going to happen in this instance. There, as Julie noted, there are so many other factors at play here that it remains to be seen what exactly it is the president will do. We've asked about the strategy going into today's meeting and not really gotten a response from the White House about that, really just one that says, you know, it's time to get something done, and the president's going to make that point today before he goes to the border and talks more about national security next week, rather this week, and then we'll hear the State of the Union next week, guys.
Aaron, we also expect the president to bring out that national security bill, still struggling to get through the House, includes aid for Ukraine, along with aid for Israel. What more can we expect there?
Yeah, this is something that every member of the administration who makes a public appearance has really taken time to try to say this is a major issue that the U.S. needs to be concerned about for our own national security purposes and for global security, really. This need to pass this security supplemental to get Ukraine weapons as it's starting to falter a bit in its effort against Russia, and also the national security funding portion that would affect Israel in terms of providing military assistance there, but perhaps more importantly, would create some avenues for humanitarian aid to be increased from the U.S. going into Gaza to help the Palestinian people. So a lot on the president's agenda here, and we're going to hope to hear from perhaps the White House this afternoon when the press secretary speaks, and potentially from these congressional leaders as they leave the meeting. There will be a camera right outside the West Wing.
All right, Julie and Aaron, thank you both very much.
A severe storm risk stretching from Missouri to Michigan today. Let's get a check on your morning news now weather.
Angie Lastman is with us in studio. Hey, Angie, good morning.
Hey, good morning, guys. Good chunk of the Midwest is included in this threat that we could see develop here as we get into the afternoon, evening, and even overnight hours tonight. 41 million people included that. You can see some major cities as well. St. Louis, Chicago, Detroit, Louisville, all included in that slight risk for us to see the hail up to golf ball size. We could potentially see wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour, and not ruling out the potential for a few tornadoes across this region as well. Again, the potential is there for this to occur after dark as well. We know how dangerous nocturnal tornadoes are. Here's the deal as far as the storm system is concerned. It's a big one. It's powerful. It's going to be moving across this region here over the next day or so. We head into tomorrow, and you can see the heavy rain and the snow that will track across the Midwest. It shifts out east, and we're talking about the East Coast being impacted by those, with those same kind of impacts, not the severe weather, but the rain, the snow. snow as we get into your Wednesday. Behind it, much colder conditions. We've seen kind of a roller coaster ride as far as our temperatures have gone for the middle of the country, the Midwest, even the Northeast over the next couple of days. And we've got a lot of changes coming with regards to that. We've also got some good soaking rain for some folks. I think the more widespread amounts, 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch is more likely, but you can see some of these spots picking up to an inch or even 2 inches of rain by the time we get through your Wednesday. And it's not just the east that's dealing with our next storm system. We've got one out west, not quite as many of these winter alerts up, but 7 million people included in those, mainly focused across portions of the Pacific Northwest. That's where the heavy rain is going to be a big issue once again. No surprise here. We've got wind that we'll have to deal with as well for coastal parts of Oregon and Washington. And we'll see this working into this region here as we get into your Wednesday, eventually Thursday. Notice the snow that will be draped across those mountain regions. We could see anywhere from 1 inch to 2 inches per hour. That means that travel is going to be really difficult, near impossible in some of these regions, especially on those mountain roads. Heads up there, and we'll pick up likely a good amount of snow for some folks. 4 to 6 feet is the more likely amounts. We could see higher than that, of course, especially in the higher elevations. But this will be something that we have to deal with, guys, as we get into the next couple of days. And they've, of course, had no rest there when it comes to difficult weather. So we'll have this next system that works on shore for them and impacts them there. I think up to 12 feet of snow is going to be possible across parts of the Sierra range. Lake Tahoe, Yosemite, Mount Whitney, all included in that, up to Mount Shasta. So heads up for folks there. And the rain, a little difficult too, up to 3, maybe even 5 inches of rain. So will be impactful for folks in that region through at least Thursday.
Just from you said feet, 12 feet.
12 feet, yeah. It's going to be a difficult one. You know, we say oftentimes difficult travel, but that'll be near impossible across that region.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.